Hello and welcome to the Brock Campus Conservatives podcast. The Brock Campus Conservatives podcast is a platform designed to open up a dialogue for members of the Brock community and facilitate discussions on wide-ranging topics today. Participating with us today are members of the Brock Campus Conservatives, Patrick, Ben, Luca, and Andrew. Welcome everyone. Today we are going to be discussing topics surrounding what does conservatism mean in modern day politics? For our first topic, what is the concept of tradition in conservatism, and what do you believe is the value in conservative traditions? To start off, we're going to pass this one to Patrick.
So I feel that in modern politics, there is increasing divisiveness and trying to tear down the past. So to me, I feel that conservatism is very important because learning from the past is always the way to move forward. I'm a big believer in progressive conservatism, and what that means to me is that you got to look to the future and make a better future, but you're going to do that by learning from the past and respecting the past. We got to hold on to what is dear to us and hold on to what we know works, and then learn from what didn't work and then apply that to help improve it in the future. In Canada, we have a very proud history. We have a great country, and of course there have been mistakes. No country is perfect, but we have a lot that we can learn from that we did well. There's also things that we didn't do well that we can learn from. So just to reinforce that idea, we can always look to the past to find lessons to apply to the future, and that's how we're going to get better.
I think that when it comes to respecting tradition, conservatism in terms of that is very useful in that perspective, because in the current political climate, not just in Canada, but also in the United States and even Europe and basically the entire globe, a lot of people in politics and even law, which is very connected to politics, as we all know, really want to skip processes, those long-held judicial and political processes that conservatives consistently defend and state that those processes are needed to get to the final goal of making a law or making a decision. And I think the issue with that is that tradition, that respect for that tradition of the process, either that be judicial or political, is being heavily lost because people just want answers, they want conclusions as quickly as they possibly can without going through a proper process in whatever field that might be, political, judicial, and etc.
Yeah, I think in the modern kind of political climate, as you guys said, in a lot of the narrative has been that almost everything in the past was wrong. Everything in the past was, I don't know, you can say anything racist, sexist, and everything is kind of it's very popular to see things from that lens. And as Patrick said, there is definitely sins of the past, but I don't think it's very appropriate to say everything that is old is obsolete, if that makes sense. Because of research in the past, there's tons of advancements, and I don't think that disregarding that will be very helpful in the future.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of give a definition to conservatism, and especially in modern day where many negative misconceptions are associated with conservatism. And I think Leslyn Lewis actually defines conservatism very well in her statement that's saying conservatism is something that provides society with a stable base. It allows society to kind of be stable with a certain set of beliefs and allow it to not kind of go crazy, which is something we're seeing today where society is quite divided, whether it be on various issues. Online, it defines conservatism as a commitment to traditional values and ideas with opposition to change or innovation, which I think is false. I think conservatism isn't necessarily an opposition to change or innovate, because as Patrick said, there is progressive conservatism where you outline things that are technically bad in the past that society kind of labels as something that should change. And then there's a certain set of beliefs that are really good for society, which hold down the law, such as murder is illegal, things like that, where society should have a set of beliefs to ensure its stability. And I think conservatism today has really gotten a bad label for what it truly is, when it really is just having traditional values and beliefs. And a lot of people tend to associate conservatism with such a one-dimensional view, and that's completely false as well. Conservatism can be subject to the person, whether you have a different religion, different ethnicity, different gender. Conservatism for each and every person can be different because it is conserving their values, when people tend to associate conservatism with only associated with white males who conserve God and family and stuff like that. But conservatism can be different for everyone.
Yeah, and Andrew, I really like what you said there about, looking at what needs to be changed and what we should keep, because this has always been the case, but particularly today, a lot of people, when they view politics, more think of it as almost change for the sake of change. These laws are old, they're antiquated, so of course we need to replace them. Well, that's not the case. You really need to look at what you're dealing with and to kind of take an overview of society and see, what worked and what didn't work, because just going for progression for the sake of progression, change for the sake of change, you're going to get away from what works for you, and that's going to start to undermine your culture and your society. So yeah, really good point there. We really need to look at what we need to preserve.
For sure. I think today a lot of people tend to get obsessed with change and progressivism in itself, and kind of committing to this idea that everything needs to be constantly changing and adapting to society and stuff like that, when in reality, to have a stable society, as I mentioned, it needs a set of beliefs. And for everyone, those beliefs can vary. And in Canada, it's obviously a difficult climate because we have one of the most multicultural countries in the world. And we have a lot of conservative people in Canada who will tend to want to conserve those ideologies and stuff. But that also allows for one of the greatest countries in the world in terms of inclusivity and having people live together when they have completely different ideologies. And I think Canada does that better than many countries in the world. But as you said, Patrick, I think a lot of people in our society today, and along with the whole cancel culture thing, are committed to kind of tearing down history, which, if anyone has taken history class, that history will repeat itself in some form if it's not properly studied, cited, and acted upon, right? And a lot of people are tending to be obsessed with tearing down people, tearing down their accolades and stuff like that, because it didn't fit their mold of what they believe is right in our society. So I think conservatism as a whole provides a stable base for society and what we should follow, but also allows for innovation and change, contrary to what many people believe conservatism is.
Our next topic will be the fiscal distinctions of conservatism. What are the main fiscal stances of conservatives? And for what reasons do you believe they are more effective than other parties' fiscal stances?
Yeah, so I think conservatism today has gotten a high level of association with fiscal stances, and taxation, capitalism, free markets, and stuff like that, due to the fact and due to a push of progressives. And I think that conservatism, why our fiscal stances and why our fiscal beliefs are superior, is because they generally promote a democratic society. They promote a free society. And well, that's something that is held dear to all Canadians, if I'm not mistaken, being a free country and something that we all believe in. Whether it be lower taxes, conservatives, at least in Canada, tend to believe that money is better spent or better handled in the pockets of Canadians rather than in the hands of government. Government expenditure oftentimes can leave way for certain types of corruption. We've seen this with things such as the We Charity scandal. I firmly believe that money is much better spent in the pockets of Canadians. In moderation, though, I know there is definitely many social programs that we do need, such as healthcare and education. But outside of that, there oftentimes I believe that money is better suited in the pockets of Canadians, and I'm sure most Canadians would likely agree with that. Free markets are always promoted with Conservatives because, as I said, we promote a free society. The best type of market is a free market. It allows consumers and sellers to freely negotiate prices and allows for a free flow in the market, something that does not happen in a regulated market. It allows for products to actually be good products, or else they wouldn't sell, in comparison to a regulated market where products that aren't as good may be promoted more than products that are actually better. And in capitalism as a whole is also promoting conservatism, because in comparison and things that are pushed by Karl Marx and communist ideologies of dispersing wealth into the pockets of workers, that really limits one's ability to achieve in life. I'm sure we've all had the dream or the ideas that you want to become rich in life and you want to be successful. Well, capitalism is really the only system that allows for that. Communism and somewhat socialism don't really necessarily allow for that, because it limits what you can attain personally. And that's why I'm always been a strong advocate for capitalism. It allows the strongest and most determined people to really go after and get what they want in life. And I think that's the right of all human beings, to be able to chase their dreams and attain what they want to attain.
I would have to agree on that, Andrew. You really, essentially, in a nutshell, nailed on the head what conservatives believe economically in terms of capitalism and free markets. But the reason why I would say is more of a historical reason. If you really look at the big picture in history, most countries who've been capitalist, you can name numerous ones: the United States, Canada, West Germany, which eventually became Germany again after 1990, Italy, France, the UK, Japan. They've all been successful countries. The people in that country have had much better quality of life than people say in socialist, communist countries, and even fascist as well. And they've also had a better overall freedom to really do whatever they please with their money they gain from whatever they really do to gain that money, whatever career they may entail within. So I think, from a historical perspective, that's the reason why I think capitalism is probably the most effective stance, and I think is the best stance that conservatives can really align with. Because if you look at so many countries nowadays, 30 years after the Cold War ended, after the fall of communism pretty much throughout the world, except China, North Korea, and maybe Venezuela and Cuba, most of these countries who are post-communist now have really struggled after the communism fell, because it really showed you how behind communism was compared to the rest of the Western world. For example, countries like Croatia, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, all those countries who used to be communist were really behind when they stopped being communist. And what system brought them back up was capitalism. The system that brought their people economic freedom and prosperity again after decades of harsh communist rule, of being limited to only doing work in a shoe factory for 30 years and they die, is capitalism. And I think that historical example, or the numerous historical examples of the failures of alternatives to capitalism, really shows why conservatives must continue to defend capitalism, be a line of capitalism, and why it shows that capitalism is not likely, the most effective economic stance and system that really has ever been created after this point in human history.
Yeah, that's what I find so ironic with this kind of push towards, the kind of, what's the word? Idolizing of Karl Marx, and kind of communism and whatnot, is that, it made people miserable and poor and all that, and it's just like, and like you said, as soon as it fell and they were kind of exposed, it was like, man, they really didn't create or do anything, everyone is poor, and like communism killed, like, oh God, hundreds of millions of people. And I think that's kind of the main thing with capitalism. It's like it's the best thing we have, system of economy we have so far. And sure, you can point out flaws, but it's certainly the best we have so far. And that doesn't, as opposed compared to communism, kind of free market capitalism, it doesn't just print money; it creates wealth. It allows people to own assets, to own businesses, to have a sustainable job, to feed their family, where things like communism or even socialism doesn't allow for that sort of growth.
All right, so I love some of the points that are being discussed here about the positives of capitalism, but I'd also just like to add that, to me, a big pillar of conservative financial policies is it's about responsibility and about being realistic, because of course it's always easy to fund as many programs and fund as many services as you want. That's going to make you real popular, but guess what? You're going to need to pay for that somehow, and that's going to be the people paying for that, right? So, trying to keep taxes low and managing the budget responsibly, making sure that you're not spending too much money, that improves quality of life in the end, right? Like, I got a little story about that. Just recently I purchased some products from Austria, and after I made my purchase online, I was astonished to see that there's 20% sales tax added to my purchase. So imagine that each time you make a purchase as simple as something like a t-shirt, like I did, a fifth of the original price is added onto it that you need to pay in taxes. That's ridiculous. That's definitely going to make it harder in your day-to-day life to get by. So, just like I said, it's about being responsible with the budget, being responsible with money, because it's always easy to spend, but it's difficult to pay for it. So if you're smart about it and you're not spending other people's money and you're not racking up debt that other people's going to pay, people are going to appreciate that.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Patrick, Dennis Prager, a very smart man, mentions that conservatism is more to do with what does good rather than what feels good. And I think that tends to be quite the reality in today's policymaking in Canada, where more left-leaning political parties fiscally tend to lean on the feels good side of things financially, whether it be fighting for we should have fully paid 14 days a month of sick leave, this and that. Well, yeah, it feels good to tell people, well, you can go home if you're ill, you can do this, you can receive money and you'll be good. But does that actually do good? At the end of the day, no, because you'll actually be paying for it in taxes. And not only that, but other people who don't actually enjoy these benefits will be paying for it as well. So I think in terms of fiscal responsibility, conservatives are much more responsible economically. And you look at just recently in 2008 with Stephen Harper's government, much of what they did in cutting corporate taxes allowed for a high level of investment into small businesses, which allowed Canada to actually come out of the recession faster than any G7 country. And in addition to that, we see a federal liberal government with Trudeau, who has spent a lot of money, and I won't argue there were a lot of necessary programs such as CERB, but you can obviously critique parts of it. There was definitely a need to support Canadians throughout the pandemic financially. I don't think on the scale that he did was necessary, but regardless, all this spending is highly a belief of more left-leaning parties, and that tends to be something that conservatives get critiqued with, because people say, oh, well, you're not spending, you're not investing in healthcare, you're not investing in education. Well, it's probably because we outweighed the benefits and the costs, and we found that the benefits of paying into this service, they actually are a lot less than the costs actually are in taxes that you're going to have to pay for it, right? And I think Ben Shapiro says it very well. Capitalism makes the poor in America the richest poor people you will find. And I forget the number, but the lowest class bracket in the United States is actually much more wealthy than the middle class in a lot of underdeveloped countries. And that just goes to show that capitalism has really not created this system of inequality and poverty that many tend to believe. It is just solely because based off the fact that it allows for people to move beyond and reach above their means and become billionaires, such as the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks of the world. Those outliers really skew the entire capitalist ideology economically and how the wealth distribution is actually laid out.
The last topic for this evening will be the social distinctions of conservatism. What are the social distinctions of conservatism that are important to you, and for what reasons do they motivate you to call yourself a conservative?
I think a social stance that is important to conservatism would be freedom of speech and limited government. And those are important, especially in the current political climate, because if we really analyze it, the left wing of politics are really challenging free speech and what you can say, with the whole cancel culture idea of if what you say doesn't follow the overall cultural beliefs, you will get quote unquote canceled. And I think that's wrong. And I think a distinction we need to keep in mind that is so important to conservatism, and what makes me personally proud to be a conservatism, is freedom of speech. Now, of course, freedom of speech needs to have its limits, in my opinion. You just can't go saying, I prefer not to say certain things that should not be said, but there has to be a line that cannot be crossed at the same time in order to respect other people's freedoms to the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, as quoted in the U.S. Constitution and in numerous other conservative-based, democratic-based writings. So I think freedom of speech is an important social distinction with limits to respect other people's freedoms. And also limited government is important too, because it's always bad when government is heavily involved in your life, because the people need freedom. In democracies, people need freedom to do what they want, to make their own fortune, to live their own lives. Once again, the whole idea of being able to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I think that limited government is another important social distinction that makes me very proud to call myself a conservative.
Yeah, Luca, I totally agree with you. I think an important part of whether it be conservatism, but I'm surprised, more. I'm surprised this is a more conservative viewpoint. Is freedom of speech. We're recording this now on April 30th, and there's things going around that Justin Trudeau is trying to pass a bill called Bill C-10, I believe, and it would give power to either the federal government or someone to censor and take down, basically, in an Orwellian sense, wrong things that would quote, I don't know, just endanger or misinformation and all that, and censor all that. And if that's not scary to everybody, I don't know what to say, really. That just seems frightening. Now, whether that'll pass or not, I don't know. But the fact that that's even being suggested is terrifying. And like you said, Luca, yeah, for sure, there are definitely limits to what you could call freedom of speech. Things like slander, things like threats, maybe fraud. Those things are definitely. But it seems that, geez, it just feels like in the past little bit, the wrong opinion will get you quote unquote canceled. And if Bill C-10 goes through, and maybe it already gone through, but the last time I checked, it's still just being processed. But someone could fact check me on that. There's possibility for just being taken off the internet or censored for having the wrong opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I was going to bring up Bill C-10 as well. In Stephen Guilbeault's words, it would give the federal government the power to suppress information and user-created content that goes against the government's beliefs and ideologies. That's remarkable that that's even being considered in a democratic society. It's unbelievable, but besides the fact, social distinctions for me, like we said, freedom of speech is important to me because it allows people to act freely, something that should be a staple in a democratic society. And like you said, Ben, the fact that it's become a belief that is a staple to a one side of the spectrum is remarkable as well. It's unbelievable that some people will argue against freedom of speech. Now, although freedom of speech allows people to, I don't know, have their feelings hurt, like Lucas said, freedom of speech has its limits. The Fraser Institute posted an article explaining that freedom of speech should be granted to all until it actually impedes someone else's ability to actually freely achieve and freely act within a democratic society. So I can say what I want unless it's actually going out to actually impede your ability to live a good life. In addition to that, I believe in a small government. I don't believe in large overreaching government because that, again, allows for corruption. It allows for government to regulate much more than it needs to. And we've seen that in Canada with a lot of things. I know it's annoying for me where they're trying to regulate cryptocurrencies now. It's remarkable that the government wants so much power over everything, but that's why I tend to believe on smaller government and more free markets, as we mentioned. And for me, religion is an important social conservative topic as well to me. And obviously, religion can be subjective to every person. A Muslim conservative or a Buddhist conservative, for them, their religion might be their social conservative ideology. But for me, it's Christianity and believing in God and believing in the church. Growing up in a Catholic family and going to a Catholic school, it was always important to me. But I do acknowledge that in our society today, and especially in Canada, we've grown in a society where I don't think religion should be something that a government governs based off the fact that our society is so diverse. Governing based off of the founding religion of the country will not properly represent the other people and other religions and cultures that are present within the country. But for me, as a conservative, it's still an important part of my not so much political beliefs, but kind of the social conservative aspect of it that many tend to associate with conservatism. But as I said, it's not Christianity that's exclusive to conservatism. Every religion can be a part of conservatism.
Social conservatism has always been very important. I proudly describe myself as a social conservative. Social conservatism's place in modern society is that a sense of morality and a sense of what's right and wrong, I feel, is increasingly being lost in modern society. Even when you look at a lot of decisions that governments around the world are making, just like here where we are discussing freedom of speech, it's easy to look at and say, oh, well, this benefits the government. We could regulate this. We could tax it. But I feel people need to stop and ask themselves, but is this right or is this wrong? Like, does this not feel wrong to be trying to limit this, to be trying to regulate this? And that applies to a lot of other things too. There's a lot of, currently illegal activities that a lot of groups on the left are advocating for to legalize them and regulate them. And often the arguments is that, it will save money on policing or that you can tax it. But like I said, going back to, does that not seem wrong? Is it not, should something be decriminalized because it will generate more money? But what if society views it that that's wrong and that goes against their morals? So that's always what social conservatism, that's what social conservatism has always really meant to me, is you need those morals reinforced by society, reinforced by the government, because we need to take a step back and, look at our morals and think about, is our government reinforcing that, or is it going against that because they feel that it benefits them, that they can profit from it because it will be easier for them? Because doing what's right isn't often the easy thing to do, but you got to do it because in your heart it's right. So that's really what social conservatism means to me.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to look at the morality side of things, Patrick, and it's interesting to me when you consider what does society kind of accept as moral. Well, a shared belief among all religions and societies generally is that murder is wrong, and there's many beliefs like that. But when you start to get into more touchy subjects, I think that's where conservatism tends to start to draw the line, where you say, well, is marriage between a man and a woman, or can it be between anyone? For some, that question might be as clear cut as, is murder wrong? For some, it might be very complex of a question, right? So it's really interesting, and I think that's a whole other debate you can have on whether government should really regulate what society deems as what the moral beliefs should be. And it's hard to tell people what is right and wrong, because who is any human person to tell you morally what is right and wrong? That generally is based off of your own personal experiences. But I think conservatism tends to say, well, we've always had a belief of what is right and wrong, and we should likely stick to that, because changing what is right and wrong frequently creates an unstable society, where society will start to become more divided, and have conflict within society, as we've seen much so in the United States, especially over the recent year. There's been upwards of 30 mass shootings in the last couple months. I mean, it's crazy, right? So I think conservatism really creates a stable base, as I said at the beginning, and it really tends to say, well, we had a version of morality and what is right and wrong, and I think we should stick to that rather than changing it all the time.
I'm just gonna maybe clarify something you said, and you can disagree with me. I think one thing to keep in mind that's important is kind of the separation of sort of religion and politics. You had just mentioned the the argument of whether gay marriage should be legal or not. I know you probably didn't mean to say this, but just to clarify, just because something might be wrong in religion, I personally don't believe that something should be it should be in law. I don't think the government should have a say in those types of things. Where lines might get blurry would be in something like Patrick said, with decriminalizing certain drugs. Places such as, I think, Oregon and maybe Washington State decriminalize things like I think it was maybe crack and heroin. I think they have like little centers where they can, quote unquote, do them safely. And I don't know, that's a very sort of gray area where I see the argument, but it just seems like you're doing more harm than good at that point. I think like if it harms the individual, I think those things should be illegal, but things such as marriage, I don't think should have much regulation, with exceptions, of course. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, Ben. I was just making an example of like a religious moral idea compared to what it could be perceived in the political realm. And yeah, I definitely agree. I think religion, especially more so in today's society, has really taken a back seat in policy and policy creation. And I think that generally represents Canada a lot better than committing to governing based off of one or two religions or whatever, right? So I think it's good to separate religion and politics and fully represent the diverse population that Canada truly has.
Thank you all. And with that final discussion, we will be ending our podcast for tonight. We look forward to having you all join us for further discussions on the Brock Campus Conservatives podcast. Thank you once again to all of our participants and to everyone who came out to listen to the Brock Campus Conservatives podcast tonight. Thank you all. Stay safe, take care, and have a great evening.